The greatest pain of your life does not come to destroy you. It comes to change you in a way that only the soul can understand. No one tells us this when everything begins to fall apart, when a relationship ends in a way that cannot be saved, when someone leaves without a chance to say goodbye, when you wake up on a very ordinary morning and realize you no longer recognize yourself. We often call these moments failure, punishment, signs that we have gone the wrong way. But what if everything you once called hell was actually a doorway? What if the deepest pain was not a sentence, but an invitation to step into who you truly are? Carl Jung believed that the human soul does not grow in safety. It grows in moments when it is forced to face the rawest truth about itself. Not the easy truth, but the truth that makes us tremble. The things we have avoided for years, the emotions we have hidden beneath roles, responsibilities, and the expectations of others. The greatest test of the soul does not arrive with drums or signs. It never announces that this is the turning point of your life. It comes quietly, disguised as loss, chaos, emptiness, and often, while you're in the middle of it, you have no idea that you're being tested. There may have been a time like this in your life, a period when everything seemed to leave you at once. Relationships that once supported you suddenly felt distant. Plans that once made you believe in the future suddenly dissolved. You tried to hold on to your old self, but it slipped through your hands like sand. You did everything right, yet life gave no answer. And in that silence, a question appeared that no one taught us how to face. If everything you once relied on disappears, who are you left to be? Jung called this moment the beginning of a very ancient journey, the journey downward. Not downward as failure, but downward as depth, deep within, where the light of reason can no longer reach, where the parts of you that were rejected, suppressed, forgotten are waiting to be seen. He called this the night of the soul, where a person is forced to face their own shadow. No titles, no roles, no beautiful stories to tell others, only the living truth, and sometimes a very painful truth about the person you tried so hard not to become. This is why the test of the soul always makes us feel lost, because it does not ask what you have achieved. It asks what you've been avoiding. It does not care how strong you appear in the eyes of others. It cares whether you are honest enough to look directly at your own fear. And the most frightening thing is not the loss outside. The most frightening moment is when you realize that the layers you wore to be loved, to be accepted, to be safe, no longer work. Many people mistake this phase for total collapse. They think they are broken, ruined, at the very end. But Jung would say that this is when the soul begins to work seriously. This is when what no longer belongs to your true self is stripped away. Not to punish, but to free, because you cannot become yourself while living as a copy designed to please the world. In those long nights, when you have no answers, no direction, no one to lean on, something very strange begins to happen. You start to hear questions you never had time to listen to before. You begin to notice old patterns, repeating fears, choices you made not from love, but from the fear of being abandoned. This is not an accident. This is the soul pulling you closer to the truth. This test does not measure you by endurance alone. It does not ask how long you can suffer. It asks whether you dare to stay with the pain without denying it, whether you dare to stop running, stop numbing, stop blaming, and truly look at what is happening inside you. Many people overcome external hardships, but never overcome the meeting with themselves. And that is why they keep repeating the same pain in different forms. If you are listening to these words and feel something familiar, it may be because you have walked through that door before. You may have thought you were losing everything, when in truth you were being guided back to your deepest place. The test of the soul does not destroy you. It destroys the illusions of who you must be to deserve love. And when those illusions collapse, what remains is not emptiness, but a very real space where your true self begins to breathe. But this journey does not end with collapse. In truth, it is only just beginning. Because after everything grows quiet again, after the storm has passed, the soul reveals very subtle signs. Small changes that cannot be reversed. The way you see the world, see others, and see yourself begins to shift. And those changes will tell you something important. You are not broken as you once believed. You crossed a threshold that not everyone dares to enter. After everything collapses, the most frightening thing is not the loss, but the long silence that follows it. No more noise from familiar roles, no more packed schedules to escape emotions. No one left to tell you to be strong. There is only you, and a space so empty that you begin to wonder whether you are disappearing. But it is within that emptiness that something very ancient begins to unfold, slowly and without mercy. The soul starts to strip away what is no longer true. Carl Jung called this phase the journey into the night sea, where consciousness no longer leads the way, and you are forced to learn how to walk by feeling. This is when the shadow appears most clearly. Not the shadow from movies, but the collection of fears, anger, jealousy, suppressed desires, and even the dreams you buried because you believed you were not worthy of them. These parts do not appear to punish you. They appear because you have not seen them for far too long. Many people, when entering this phase, try to turn back. They do everything they can to return to their old self, to familiar relationships, old habits, even when they know these things no longer fit, not because they are good, but because they are familiar. Familiarity always creates a sense of safety, even when it is slowly suffocating you. But the test of the soul no longer allows you to live by familiarity. It forces you to choose truth, even when that truth leaves you feeling exposed and fragile. There are nights when you lie there, your body exhausted but your mind refusing to sleep. Old memories rise without warning. Questions you once avoided suddenly become impossible to ignore. Why am I always afraid of being abandoned? Why do I always feel the need to prove my worth? Why do I choose people who cannot stay? This is not weakness. This is the soul demanding honesty, and honesty in this phase is the most painful thing of all. Jung once said that until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. The test of the soul is the moment you begin to see those invisible strings. You realize that many choices you believed were random were actually guided by old wounds, that many of your intense reactions do not come from the present, but from unhealed memories. And realizing this does not bring immediate relief, it brings a sense of being overwhelmed. Because when you can no longer blame circumstances, other people, or destiny, you are forced to turn back and look at yourself. And this goes against how we are taught to survive. We are taught to move forward, to stay positive, to be strong. No one teaches us how to stay with pain without rushing to fix it. No one teaches us that there are seasons in life when the bravest thing is not doing something, but not running away. On this journey, you may feel like you're falling behind, when in truth you're going deeper, deeper into the place where real answers exist. The soul does not care how you look from the outside during this phase. It only cares whether you have the courage not to turn your back on yourself. And if you keep going, even slowly, even tired, even uncertain, something very subtle will begin to shift. You begin to notice that the pain is no longer completely chaotic. It starts to take shape. It has origins. It has a story. You see the connection between what you have lived through and how you respond to life. This is the moment when the storm stops being an enemy. It becomes a message, and when pain carries a message, it is no longer just meaningless suffering. This does not happen in a brilliant moment of awakening. It happens very slowly. Through mornings when you still get up without motivation, through difficult conversations with yourself, through admitting that there are parts of you that have never been loved in the right way, and when you dare to look directly at those parts without condemning yourself, a quiet transformation begins to take root. You may still feel sad, you may still feel afraid, but you are no longer completely swept away by them. There is a very small distance between you and your emotions, a space just wide enough for you to breathe. Jung believed this was the first sign that the soul had begun to integrate the shadow, not to eliminate it, but to understand it, not to defeat it, but to listen to it, because the shadow is not the enemy. It is the part of you that has been forgotten for far too long. And when you begin to treat yourself with curiosity instead of judgment, with patience instead of force, you will realize that you are not as lost as you once thought. You are walking a path that very few dare to take. A path that does not promise quick rewards, but promises truth. And truth, even when painful, is always the foundation of freedom. From this point on, inner changes will slowly reveal themselves in the way you live, in the way you are alone, in the way you see others, and in the way you no longer react to life as you once did. These signs are not loud, but they cannot be reversed. They are proof that the test of the soul has begun to reveal its outcome, even if you cannot yet name it. There is a very quiet moment, not loud like the initial collapse, but deep enough for you to realize that you have changed. You begin to be alone without feeling abandoned, not because you no longer need anyone, but because you are no longer terrified of your own presence. Evenings that once made you restless now become slower. You can sit still, let your thoughts pass by, without needing to turn the music up loud or bury yourself in something just to forget. Loneliness, in some way, stops being a punishment. It becomes a sheltered room where you can breathe without playing a role. This does not happen because life suddenly becomes kinder. It happens because you have gone deep enough to understand that being alone does not mean being unloved. Jung believed that when people stop seeking validation from the outside, they begin to touch a rare form of maturity. Not the kind of strength that needs to be displayed, but a steadiness that does not need proof. You no longer need someone to constantly remind you that you have value. You have looked into your deepest emptiness and realized that even stripped bare, you still exist. And that is enough. At the same time, another change begins to unfold, subtle yet irreversible. You stop searching for someone to blame for your pain. Perhaps before you lived with questions aimed sharply at others. Who did this to me? Who destroyed me? Who is responsible for the years I lost? Those questions once helped you survive, but they no longer help you move forward. And then, at some point, you realize you no longer have the energy to keep carrying that resentment. Instead of seeing the world as a place full of people who cause harm, you begin to see it as a series of imperfect encounters. You do not justify cruelty. You do not forget what happened. But you understand that many people hurt you while they themselves were unaware of their own wounds. Jung once wrote that what irritates us most in others is often the doorway back to ourselves. When this truly sinks in, pain begins to change its form. It is no longer just a memory that torments you, but data that helps you understand. You may realize that you once loved in a way that begged, that you stayed in places where you were unseen, simply because you feared the familiar feeling of abandonment rising again. You may see that you once reacted too strongly to small words, because they touched a much older wound. These realizations are not comfortable, but they bring a strange kind of freedom, because when you see your role in the story, you are no longer trapped inside it. From here, life begins to change its tone. It stops shouting at you. It begins to whisper. Experiences that once brought you to your knees now become quiet teachers. You no longer ask why this happened to me with resentment in your voice. The question shifts into something else, slower, deeper. What is this trying to show me about myself? And in that very moment, when the question changes, you step out of the victim role without needing to call yourself a winner. There are moments when you look back at the past and feel surprised that you are still here. Not just in the sense of survival, but in the sense of still being able to feel, still soft, still open. You realize that if what happened did not destroy you, then perhaps it did something else. It wore away defenses that were no longer needed. It forced you to grow from the inside, where no one applauds, where no one hands out medals. At this stage, you begin to sense a very different kind of peace. It is not excited happiness. It is the feeling of no longer needing to run, no need to prove, no need to explain your life story to anyone. You can be silent without feeling empty. You can say no without feeling guilty, and you can admit that you do not know everything without feeling less than. If you are listening to these words and feel your heart slow by a beat, it may be because you have touched that place before, or because you are very close to it now. Every journey is different, but the signs of the soul maturing often speak a shared language, and sometimes, speaking it out loud, sharing a line of thought, or simply staying with stories like these is also a way to confirm that you are not alone in your experience. If it feels right, leave a few lines of your thoughts, or stay with this channel a little longer, not because of any call to action, but because some journeys need to be listened to long enough for them to bloom. These changes do not make you perfect, they only make you more real. And when you begin to live from that truth, something very important slowly appears, a strange sense of gratitude, not for the pain, but for what the pain has opened. From this point on, the story is no longer only about how much you endured, but about what you learned when you had no choice but to look directly. And right here, as that fragile piece begins to take root, the test of the soul moves to a deeper layer, no longer about survival, but about how you will live, now that you know who you are beneath everything that once fell apart. When you begin to slow down, Not because life allows it, but because inside you are no longer as rushed as before. Another change gradually reveals itself. You look back at the past without the need to defend yourself or condemn yourself. Memories that once tightened your chest now appear like old film scene, but still emotional, but no longer swallowing you whole. This is when a very strange form of gratitude begins to take shape. Not loud, not dramatic, sometimes even surprising to yourself. You are not grateful for the pain. You are grateful for what the pain forced you to become. Before, when someone said that everything happens for a reason, you may have felt offended, because when you are still bleeding, no one wants to hear about meaning. But now, when the wound is no longer open, you can look back and see the threads connecting the events. You realize that without that breakdown, you would not have stopped. Without that loss, you would not have asked questions. And without that long stretch of emptiness, you would not have heard your true voice. Meaning does not erase pain, but it gives pain a place in the story of your life. At the same time, a very different sense of peace begins to appear. Not because life has become less chaotic, but because you are no longer resisting it as before. There are days when things still do not go smoothly. Plans fall apart. Bad news arrives. Others are disappointed, but your inner reaction has changed. Fear no longer takes control immediately. Anger no longer leads every decision. There is a part of you that remains steady, as if it has already been through storms much larger than this. Jung once said that within all chaos there is a hidden order. Before, that sentence may have sounded like a distant philosophy, but now it feels very real. You have seen life fall into chaos and still continue. You have seen yourself break and still live. From that, you understand that life does not need to be perfect to be meaningful. And peace does not come from controlling everything, but from knowing that whatever happens, you can still stay with yourself. Surrender here is not giving up. It is trust born from experience, not blind belief. You no longer try to force everything to go your way. You learn to listen to the rhythm of life, even when that rhythm is uncomfortable. You understand that some things can only be understood in hindsight, and some answers appear only after you have walked far enough. This does not make you passive. On the contrary, it makes you more present in every choice. You still feel sad when loss happens. You still feel disappointed when things do not meet your expectations. But those emotions no longer define you. They pass through, leave their mark, then retreat. You no longer identify yourself with the wave. You begin to sense the ocean beneath it. And when you live from that place, you no longer need to prove your strength. Stillness speaks for you. Stillness. From this point, you also realize something very important. What once made you panic no longer holds the same power. Uncertainty. Once the thing that kept you awake at night, now becomes an unavoidable part of life. You stop demanding immediate answers. You allow yourself not to know. And within that not knowing, a space opens where creativity and intuition begin to speak. The test of the soul at this stage no longer asks whether you can endure pain. It asks whether you dare to trust life after having witnessed its dark side, whether you dare to open your heart to the world after knowing it can hurt you. And if you are here, listening to these words, it is very likely because you have already answered that question through your actions, even if you have never named it. If you pantier. This peace does not pull you away from life. It draws you closer. You are more present in conversations. You listen more than you react. You realize that many battles you once fought are no longer necessary, not because you have grown weaker, but because you have grown stronger in a deeper place. And from that quiet foundation, another quality begins to bloom naturally. Not ambition, not the desire to prove yourself, but compassion. A compassion not learned from books, but distilled from years when you did not know what to hold on to. From here, the story of the soul moves into another chapter, where pain no longer seals the heart shut, but opens it in a very human way. Compassion does not appear as a moral decision. It does not come from telling yourself that you must be more forgiving. It grows very naturally, like the way a scar makes the skin more sensitive to touch. After everything you have been through, you begin to feel the pain of others more easily, not because you are weak, but because you have been there. You have been lost. You have not known what to hold on to. And that memory makes it impossible to look at people through the same old lens. Before, you may have judged quickly. You looked at the choices of others and wondered why they were not stronger, not wiser. But now, you understand that many behaviors are simply ways people try to survive wounds they were never taught how to heal. You do not justify harm. You simply stop placing yourself outside of it. You know what it feels like to fight in silence, so you no longer rush to label anyone. Something strange happens at the same time. The relationships around you begin to change, not because you try to change them, but because your frequency has changed. Superficial conversations slowly become tiring. You no longer have the patience for long social performances. Instead, you are drawn toward people who speak honestly, live honestly, and are willing to admit that they do not have all the answers. These encounters are not many, but they have depth, and you feel seen in a very different way. Alongside this, some old relationships quietly fall away. There is no drama, no major conflict, just natural distance forming. Before, this might have terrified you, but now, you no longer cling through anxiety. You understand that not everyone is meant to walk with you through every season. Some come to teach you something, some come to test you, and some stay only until their role is complete. Letting go no longer carries the same bitterness. It carries respect. You do not need to turn someone into a villain in order to move on. You can acknowledge that a relationship once had meaning, once was necessary, but no longer fits the person you are becoming. This requires a very different kind of courage. Not the courage to confront, but the courage to accept the truth without hurting yourself further. During this stage, you also realize that your compassion is not only directed outward, it begins to turn towards you. You stop blaming yourself for not knowing sooner. You stop feeling ashamed of past choices. You look back at the version of yourself who was lost and see someone doing the best they could with what they knew at the time. This softness does not make you weaker, it makes you more whole. Jung once said that true growth happens when a person stops projecting their darkness onto others. You begin to see that many of your past conflicts did not come from the present, but from unseen parts within you. When you stop fighting those parts, the outside world becomes less confrontational, not because it changes, but because you no longer enter it with clenched hands. From this foundation, you feel a new kind of connection with people. Not a dependent attachment, but a meeting between two individuals who can stand on their own. You can love without losing yourself. You can listen without dissolving. You can be close without fearing being consumed. What once made you defensive is now replaced by conscious choice. You do not close your doors. You simply open them in the right places. This compassion also changes how you see your own journey. You no longer view the painful years as time stolen from you. You begin to see them as soil that was turned so something else could grow. You may not yet have a name for that something, but you can feel it, a steadiness that does not need display, a depth that does not need proof. And from that depth, another capacity begins to form, the ability to walk without certainty, the ability to live with questions without panic, the ability to trust an invisible current that has carried you through your darkest places and is still guiding you now. When compassion has taken root, trust is no longer an abstract idea, it becomes lived experience. And from here, the test of the soul moves one step further, into the land of uncertainty and intuition, where you are no longer protected by old maps. When the old maps no longer work, the first thing that appears is not freedom, but emptiness. You walk forward without familiar markers to lean on. No ready-made answers, no formulas that once made you feel safe. But unlike before, this uncertainty no longer paralyzes you. It is still frightening, but it no longer makes you turn back. Something inside you has learned how to stand even when the ground is not solid. You begin to realize that you do not need to know everything in order to continue. Before, you delayed many decisions simply because you were not certain enough. You waited for more signs, more reassurance, someone else to tell you that you were doing the right thing. But after passing through your greatest losses, you understand a very simple truth. There are no absolute guarantees. And if you survive days that felt impossible, then you can also keep walking without needing to control every outcome. At this stage, intuition begins to speak more clearly, not as a loud voice, but as a quiet sensation in your chest, a knowing that is hard to explain with reason. You no longer make decisions based only on the fear of loss or the need for approval. You begin to ask a different question. Is this true for the person I'm becoming? And even when the answer asks you to let go of things that once felt very familiar, you still choose to listen. Carl Jung called this movement the moment when consciousness and the unconscious begin to work together. No longer pulling against each other, no longer locked in constant conflict. You no longer fight uncomfortable emotions. You let them appear, observe them, then let them pass. This creates a new kind of trust. Not trust in outcomes, but trust in the process. Trust that no matter what happens, you have the capacity to guide yourself. From that trust, you begin to notice very subtle things, coincidences that are hard to explain, meetings that arrive at exactly the right time, doors that open only after you are ready to release what no longer fits. Jung called this synchronicity, moments when the outer world reflects your inner movement. Before, you may have dismissed them as random, but now, you sense that a gentle order is operating beneath what once seemed chaotic. At the same time, many things that once mattered begin to lose their pull. You are no longer obsessed with proving who you are. Recognition, status, comparison, all of those games slowly feel distant. Not because you are better than others, but because you have seen the cost of living through external approval. You traded too much to be accepted, and now you no longer want to pay that price. You begin to ask different questions. No longer how to have more, but how to live more truthfully. No longer who do I need to become, but who was I before I learned to doubt myself? These questions do not lead to immediate answers, but they lead you to a very real place. A place where you do not need to perform, do not need to prove, only need to be present. You may begin to make big changes, leaving a job that no longer fits, ending a relationship that has been depleted, moving to a new place. But these changes may also be very small. You say no more often. You stay silent when needed. You choose rest without guilt, big or small. These choices are guided by the same inner compass, and each time you listen to it, trust grows a little stronger. Most importantly, you no longer make decisions from fear. Fear still appears, but it no longer sits in the driver's seat. You understand that fear is part of the human experience, not a map. You stop mistaking discomfort for a sign that you are on the wrong path, because you have learned that many of the most important turning points in life begin with uncertainty. At this stage, you also realize that your old self is slowly dissolving, not in a shock, but like snow melting as the season changes. You no longer chase goals that once kept you awake at night. You no longer cling to images of success that you never stopped to ask if they were truly yours. Instead, you seek alignment between your inner world and your outer life, between what you believe and how you live. This alignment brings a very deep sense of relief. You no longer need to remember what you said to whom, no longer need to maintain multiple versions of yourself. You can show up as you are, and if that does not fit someone else, you no longer see it as failure. You understand that not every closed door is a loss. Some are simply no longer meant for you. All of this leads you to a very important threshold, a place where the test of the soul is no longer about endurance or learning. It is about what you choose to identify with the wounds you have carried, or with the wisdom they left behind, with the story you once told to survive, or with the truth that is opening beneath that story. You may sense that you are standing very close to a final shift, not loud, not dramatic, but deep enough to redefine the entire journey behind you. A moment when you look back at everything that happened and no longer see it as a chain of mistakes or injustices. You begin to see a continuous path, uneven but connected, that led you here. And it is right at this point that the strongest sign of having passed the test of the soul begins to appear. Not in what you have achieved, but in how you see your own pain. Not as something that broke you, but as something that opened your eyes. The final part of the story is not about becoming perfect. It is about becoming whole. There is a very quiet moment, so quiet that if you are not paying attention, you might miss it. Not a moment of victory, and not a moment when everything suddenly becomes better. It is the moment you realize you are no longer telling your life story in the voice of the wound. You still remember what happened. You do not forget the nights you cried, the times you felt abandoned, the stretches of road you walked alone in silence. But what has changed is how you stand inside those memories. You no longer stand as someone who was broken. You stand as someone who walked through. Before, it is very likely that you identified yourself with pain. You introduced yourself through what you lost. You defined yourself by what hurt you. Each time you spoke about the past, your body reacted before your mind could speak. But now, a healthy distance has formed. Not the distance of denial, but the distance of integration. You do not push the pain away. You place it where it belongs in the story of your life. Carl Jung believed that the deepest human maturity happens when light and shadow stop fighting. When you stop trying to become a fixed version that has been repaired, and allow yourself to be a living whole, including the parts that were once rejected. You look back at your former self, the one who was afraid, attached, confused, and instead of shame, you feel compassion. No version of you is the enemy. Every version did the best it could with the level of awareness it had at the time. Healing here is not about erasing painful memories. It is reconciliation. It is when you stop fighting the past, stop trying to rewrite it into something less painful. You allow it to exist exactly as it happened, without adding, without dramatizing. And in that acceptance, something very gentle occurs. Pain stops demanding constant attention. It steps back, making room for presence. Along with this integration, the meaning of forgiveness also changes shape. You no longer forgive because someone deserves it, nor because you want to appear noble. You forgive because you no longer want to carry that weight. You realize that resentment keeps you trapped in a moment that has already passed, while letting go opens space for the present. Forgiveness becomes an act of inner release, not a moral judgment. When you stop resisting what happened, the energy trapped in the past begins to return. You feel lighter. Not because life has fewer challenges, but because you no longer drag old battles into every new moment. From here, a very quiet kind of joy appears. Not an excited joy, not dependent on success or recognition. It feels like a steady warmth, present even in the most ordinary days. You begin to live more in the present, not through forced effort, but because you are no longer obsessed with fixing the past or controlling the future. You start to see beauty in things that once felt ordinary. A quiet morning, a conversation that does not need to impress, a silence that does not need to be filled. Life is no longer something to conquer, it becomes something to walk with. This does not mean challenges disappear. Loss will still come, uncertainty will still exist, but you enter them with a different posture. You no longer ask whether you are strong enough. You know you have been through darker places. You no longer see difficulty as a sign that you are on the wrong path. You see it as an invitation to go deeper into understanding yourself. In this state, you also stop seeking validation from the outside, not because you do not need connection, but because you no longer need others to define your worth. The gaze of the world feels lighter on your shoulders. Praise no longer lifts you too high. Criticism no longer pulls you too low. You stand firmly in your own sense of yourself. And that is a very rare kind of freedom. This freedom is not loud. It does not need announcements. It shows in how you no longer feel the need to over-explain your choices, in how you allow others not to understand without feeling threatened, in how you live true to yourself even when it is not applauded. You no longer live to be seen. You live because you are present. And from that place, a very real peace spreads. Not the peace of escaping the world, but the peace of someone who is reconciled with themselves. You no longer have to run faster than fear. You walk alongside it. You no longer try to prove that you have moved on. Your presence says it for you. When you look back at the entire journey, you see one thing clearly. What once made you believe you were broken actually brought you home, back to the primal knowing that you are enough, even when you are not perfect, back to the ability to live without being driven by the fear of judgment, back to your true self, without needing to wear any more roles. And that is when you understand the final truth, clear and unshakable. You were never destroyed. You were being reborn, layer by layer, until there was nothing left to hide.
Thank you for staying with me until the very end of this story. If this message touched your heart, please give it a like, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell so you'll never miss the next journey we take together. Your support means the world to me.